By the age of 26, Clara Whitmore had mastered something most people never noticed: how to exist without leaving an impression. It was not a skill she had chosen. It had been taught to her, carefully and consistently, until it became instinct. She had learned it first at a narrow dining table in a quiet countryside vicarage, where her aunt sat upright at the head, her back perfectly straight, her expectations unspoken yet absolute. Clara learned early that correction did not require words. A slight pause, a subtle glance, the faint tightening of her aunt's lips. These were enough. Posture reflects character, her aunt would say occasionally, though rarely more than once. After that, silence carried the lesson. Her parents had died when she was 10. The details were never discussed in her presence, only that it had been sudden, unfortunate, and irreversible. After that, her world had narrowed in ways she could not fully understand at the time. She was taken in by her aunt, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, a woman known for her discipline, her propriety, and her unshakable belief in order. Margaret had been married once. Widowed young. The circumstances, like many things in that house, remained unspoken. Clara learned not to ask. "You must understand," Margaret told her one winter evening as they sat beside a dim fire, "that comfort is not something a woman should expect. Stability is enough. Respectability is everything." Clara had nodded, though she did not entirely understand. Children rarely do. They simply adapt. And Clara adapted well. She spoke softly so as not to interrupt. She walked quietly so as not to disturb. She learned when to smile and when to remain neutral, which was often preferred. She did not express strong opinions because she was never asked for them. By the time she reached adulthood, Clara had become what society described as pleasant. It was not meant as praise, but it was accepted as such. No one described her as bold, or clever, or remarkable. Her aunt considered that a success. "A woman who draws attention invites trouble," Margaret would say. "It is far safer to be agreeable." And so Clara was. Years passed without incident, each day blending into the next with quiet predictability. Until one morning something changed. The letter arrived without warning. Clara had been seated by the window, mending a cuff with careful precision, when the post was delivered. The envelope was thick, the paper of a quality she rarely encountered. A deep red seal held it closed, pressed with a crest she did not recognize. Her aunt took it without comment. Clara watched as Margaret opened the letter with deliberate care. She read it once, then again, and then a third time, slower, as though weighing each word. The silence stretched. Finally she looked up. "This," Margaret said, folding the letter neatly, "is an opportunity." Clara's fingers stilled around her needle. "What sort of opportunity?" she asked quietly. "A marriage proposal." The words settled heavily in the room. Clara did not speak immediately. Marriage had always been presented to her not as a possibility, but as an inevitability, something that would occur when circumstances aligned, regardless of her feelings. "From whom?" she asked. Margaret handed her the letter. The name meant little at first glance, though she recognized the title. A duke. Widowed. 42 years of age. Substantial estates. No living children. The letter itself was formal, precise, entirely devoid of sentiment. There were no declarations, no attempts at charm. Only facts. Expectations. Terms. Clara read it twice, her expression unchanged. "He is not young," Margaret said, watching her closely. "Nor is he known to be particularly gentle." Clara lowered the letter. "But he is respectable," Margaret continued. "Powerful. Established. And willing." The word lingered. Willing. It felt less like an invitation and more like a decision already made. "I will accept whatever you think best," Clara replied, because that was what she had been taught to say. Margaret studied her for a moment, her gaze sharp and searching, as though looking for resistance that never came. "You will be his wife," she said finally. "Not his equal. You must remember that." Clara nodded. That night, she lay awake longer than usual. The house creaked softly around her, familiar sounds settling into unfamiliar thoughts. She stared at the ceiling, her hands folded over her chest, her breathing steady despite the quiet tension beneath it. She did not imagine love. She did not imagine happiness. She imagined endurance. The wedding was arranged with remarkable efficiency. There was no prolonged engagement, no elaborate preparations beyond what was necessary. Society, after all, had little patience for delays when a woman approached her late 20s. The ceremony took place in a modest stone church, attended by acquaintances rather than friends. Clara wore cream silk, elegant but unadorned. Her hair was pinned neatly into place, each strand secured with careful precision. Margaret insisted on it. "A wife must be composed," she said, adjusting a pin with firm fingers. "Men dislike disorder." Clara did not argue. She rarely did. The groom stood at the altar when she entered, his presence commanding without effort. He was taller than she had expected, broader in build, his posture straight and assured. Dark hair, faintly touched with gray at the temples. His expression revealed little. Controlled. Observant. When his gaze met hers, it lingered a moment longer than necessary. Not intrusive, but not indifferent either. It unsettled her. The vows were spoken without hesitation. Hands clasped. Rings exchanged. Words repeated. Marriage, Clara realized, required very little emotion. The carriage ride to his estate passed in near silence. The rhythmic sound of wheels against the road filled the space between them. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window, watching the landscape shift from familiar to unknown. She could feel his presence beside her. Steady. Unmoving. He did not attempt conversation. She did not expect it. They arrived at dusk. The estate was vast, built of stone and shadow, its structure imposing against the fading light. It carried a quiet authority, the kind that did not need to announce itself. Servants moved efficiently as they entered, their heads slightly bowed, their movements practiced and precise. Clara felt, for the first time, something unfamiliar. Not fear exactly, but awareness, a scale, of expectation, of herself within it. The chamber prepared for her was larger than any room she had ever occupied. Heavy drapes framed tall windows. Candles flickered softly, casting long shadows against the walls. The bed stood at the center, grand, immovable, unavoidable. Clara stood near the window, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. This was the moment she had prepared for. All her life. When the door opened behind her, she did not turn immediately. Her breathing became shallow. Her shoulders stiffened. Every lesson she had ever learned settled into place. Be still. Be quiet. Endure. Footsteps crossed the room. Then stopped. Time stretched. Nothing happened. The silence grew heavy enough to feel. Then at last his voice. "Clara." She flinched. "You may sit," he said. The words did not align with her expectations. Confused, she turned slowly. He stood several steps away, his coat removed, his posture formal but not imposing. He made no attempt to approach her. She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of a chair. He watched her for a moment, not with hunger, not with entitlement, but with something she could not immediately define. "How old are you?" he asked. 26, she replied quietly. He nodded once. "You are not afraid to answer a question." She did not know how to respond to that. "You have been told what marriage requires of you," he continued. "Haven't you?" "Yes." "What were you told?" Her throat tightened. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, though she kept them clasped tightly together. "That a wife must be patient," she said carefully. "Quiet. Accommodating." His expression remained still, but something in his jaw shifted. "And tonight?" he asked. Her breath caught. "That I should not resist," she whispered. "That I should endure." The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Then he turned away. Clara blinked, confusion breaking through the fear she had been holding so tightly. She had expected movement, expectation, inevitability. Not this. When he faced her again, something in his expression had changed. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but absolute. She looked up, startled. "I will not have obedience born of fear," he continued, "nor silence mistaken for consent." Clara struggled to understand. The words felt unfamiliar, as though spoken in a language she had never been taught. "You are my wife," he said. "But that does not make your body my possession." Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. "You look at me as though you expect pain," he said more softly now. "That ends tonight." Her vision blurred slightly. "I don't know how to be anything else," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Something in his expression shifted. Not pity. Something steadier. Then we will begin elsewhere, he said. He moved toward the door then paused. You will sleep in this room, he continued. I will sleep in the adjoining chamber. She stared at him. No intimacy will occur without your clear willingness. Her breath stuttered. You do not owe me endurance, he said. You owe yourself honesty. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. He reached the door then added almost as an afterthought. You may address me as you are comfortable. There is no urgency. And then he left. The door closed quietly behind him. Clara remained exactly where she was, her body still, her mind anything but. Minutes passed. Or perhaps longer. She did not move. The silence in the room was no longer oppressive. It was unfamiliar. Unstructured. That night she did not sleep. She sat by the window until the candles burned low, her thoughts shifting in ways she could not fully follow. Fear did not disappear. But it changed. It loosened its grip just enough to allow something else to surface. Something far more dangerous. Hope. And Clara Whitmore had never been taught what to do with hope. The days that followed Clara Whitmore's wedding night did not unfold the way she had prepared for. That, more than anything else, unsettled her. She had expected structure, clear expectations, defined roles, and understanding of what was required of her and when. Instead, she found herself in a space that felt strangely unoccupied. As though something essential had been removed, leaving behind a quiet she did not yet know how to fill. On her first morning in the estate, Clara woke before dawn. It was habit. Years of routine had trained her body to rise early, to prepare herself before anyone else could find fault in her appearance or behavior. She dressed carefully, smoothing every crease from her gown, arranging her hair with practiced precision. Then she paused. There was no one to inspect her. The realization lingered longer than it should have. When she entered the breakfast room, she found him already there. He sat at the long table, a letter open in front of him, his posture relaxed but attentive. Sunlight filtered through tall windows behind him, casting a quiet warmth across the room that softened the otherwise imposing space. He looked up when she entered. You are early, he observed. Clara inclined her head slightly. I did not wish to keep you waiting. I was not waiting, he said simply. She hesitated, unsure how to respond, then moved to take her seat. The meal began in silence. Not the heavy, watchful silence she had known in her aunt's home, where every movement felt observed and measured. This was something else. A silence that did not demand performance. Still, Clara found herself carefully calculating every action, how she held her cup, how she placed her utensils, how much she ate. At one point, her hand brushed the edge of the teapot too quickly, causing a slight spill onto the tablecloth. I'm sorry, she said immediately. The words came without thought. He set his cup down. Why did you apologize? He asked. Clara blinked. I made a mistake. A small one, he replied. Easily corrected. She reached for a cloth, dabbing at the spill with controlled urgency. It was careless. It was human, he said. She stilled. The distinction unsettled her more than correction would have. He did not pursue the matter further. Instead, he returned to his correspondence, allowing the moment to pass without judgment. But it did not pass for Clara. The question lingered long after the table had been cleared. Why did you apologize? Because she always had. Because she was meant to. Because existence, in her experience, was something that required constant justification. The rhythm of the household revealed itself gradually. The estate was large, its operations complex, yet everything functioned with quiet efficiency. Servants moved with practiced coordination, their respect for him evident, though never exaggerated. Clara observed more than she participated. At least at first. He did not summon her. He did not instruct her on her duties as a wife, nor did he correct her behavior when she hesitated or withdrew. Instead, he included her in small, deliberate ways. Meals were shared. Conversations were offered, never forced. What do you enjoy reading? He asked one morning as though it were an ordinary question. Clara paused. Whatever is available, she replied carefully. That wasn't the question. His tone was calm, but it held a quiet insistence. She searched for an answer and found nothing. No one had ever asked her what she enjoyed. Preferences in her upbringing had been irrelevant at best, indulgent at worst. I don't know, she admitted finally. He nodded once as though this answer made perfect sense. Then we will find out. That afternoon he led her to the estate's library. The room was vast, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with books. The scent of leather and aged paper filled the air, heavy and grounding. Light filtered through high windows, illuminating rows upon rows of knowledge she had never been encouraged to explore. "Choose something," he said. Clara stood still. The sheer number of options felt overwhelming. "Anything?" she asked. "Yes." Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the spines. Each title seemed to carry weight, expectation, possibility. It felt like being asked to reveal something deeply personal without knowing what that something was. Finally, she selected a slim volume, essays modest in appearance, unintimidating. A safe choice. That evening they sat by the fire. He read his own book, occasionally turning a page with quiet focus. Clara held hers more cautiously, moving slowly through the words, pausing when she encountered something unfamiliar. At one point she faltered over a sentence. She felt his gaze shift toward her. But he said nothing. He did not correct her. He did not offer assistance. He simply waited. It was a small thing. But it settled somewhere deep within her. Days passed. Then weeks. Change, Clara discovered, did not arrive in grand moments. It came in fragments, small, almost unnoticeable shifts that accumulated over time. She spoke more. Not freely, not yet. But enough to form opinions, to ask questions, to respond without immediate hesitation. She laughed once. The sound startled her more than it did him. He looked at her, a faint smile touching his expression, but he did not comment on it. He simply allowed it to exist. At night she slept alone. And yet she did not feel alone. The absence of dread was its own form of comfort. Still old habits remained. When he entered a room she stood. When he spoke she listened without interruption. When he asked what she wanted she faltered. "I don't know," she said more than once. "That is an answer," he would reply. And an honest one. Their first disagreement came unexpectedly. It was late evening. The house had settled into quiet, the servants withdrawn, the corridors dimly lit by scattered candles. Clara remained in the sitting room long after he had retired. She sat stiffly on the sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze distant. She had been thinking. About the whispers she had not yet heard, but expected to. About the life she had entered without understanding it. About the fragile, unfamiliar peace she did not trust. When he returned, having forgotten a book, he paused in the doorway. "You should rest," he said gently. "I will," she replied immediately, rising too quickly. He studied her. "You need not rise for me." "I should," she insisted. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because you are my husband," she said slowly. "And therefore, it is respectful." "Respect is not submission," he replied calmly. "And submission is not required here." Her chest tightened. "You say that now," she said before she could stop herself. Silence followed. He did not react immediately. "Say what you mean," he said quietly. Clara swallowed. "I mean that kindness can change," she whispered. "That patience can be temporary." Something in his expression shifted, not anger toward her, but something deeper. Frustration perhaps. Or memory. "I will not punish you for your honesty," he said. "But I will correct false assumptions." She braced instinctively. "I am not kind out of novelty," he continued, "nor restrained out of convenience." He moved closer, though not enough to overwhelm her. "I am this way because I have failed before." The words settled heavily. Clara looked up. "My first marriage," he said, "was built on silence." She listened, her breath held. "My wife was obedient, polite, accommodating." His jaw tightened. "And profoundly lonely." Clara's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. "I believed that providing comfort was enough," he continued. "I believed her quiet meant contentment." He exhaled slowly. It meant resignation. The room felt smaller. She died believing she was unimportant. Clara's chest ached in a way she could not explain. "I will not allow that mistake again," he said firmly. "Especially not with someone who has already been taught to disappear." Something inside her shifted. Not suddenly. Not completely. But enough. That night Clara cried. Quietly. Alone. Not from fear but from something deeper. Grief, perhaps. For a woman she had never known. For a version of herself she was only beginning to understand. The next morning something changed. At breakfast, when he asked whether she preferred tea or coffee, Clara hesitated. Then carefully she answered. Tea, she said. But only in the mornings. He looked at her. Then nodded. Noted. It was a small moment. But it mattered. Their first physical contact came days later. They were walking through the gardens, the path uneven beneath their feet. Without thinking, he extended his hand. Clara froze. Her breath caught. He noticed immediately and began to withdraw. It's all right, he said. I didn't mean. No, she interrupted softly. She looked at his hand again. Then, slowly, she placed her fingers in his. The contact was brief, light, almost uncertain. But it sent something unfamiliar through her chest, a quickening she did not yet have words for. That evening she avoided him. Not out of fear, but confusion. When he knocked on her door later, she hesitated before letting him in. You're withdrawing, he said gently. Tell me why. Tears rose unexpectedly. I felt something, she admitted. And then I felt ashamed. Of what? Of wanting, she whispered. The word lingered between them. I was taught that desire was something a woman survives, she continued. Not something she feels. His expression softened. Desire is not obligation, he said carefully. And it is not shame. She shook her head. I don't know how to separate the two. Then we won't rush it, he replied. Nothing will happen unless you want it. And even then we stop when you say stop. The certainty in his voice steadied her. Weeks passed. Clara changed. Slowly. Quietly. But undeniably. She spoke more freely. Asked questions without rehearsing them first. Laughed occasionally, the sound still surprising but no longer unfamiliar. She began to sit beside him in the evenings. At first there was distance between them. Then less. The first time their shoulders touched, she tensed. He moved away immediately. It's all right, she said softly. He stilled. Please don't move. He didn't. Their first kiss came without ceremony. No grand moment. No rising tension. Just a quiet evening by the fire. May I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why are you so patient with me? He considered the question. Because patience is not restraint, he said. It is respect. She nodded slowly. Then after a pause. May I try something? His gaze sharpened. Yes. She leaned forward, uncertain, her movements hesitant. When her lips brushed his, it was brief. Almost accidental. She pulled back instantly. Is that all right? She asked. Yes, he said. She tried again. This time she lingered. When she finally leaned away, her face was flushed, not with shame but with something new. I didn't disappear, she whispered. No, he said softly. You stayed. But the world beyond the estate had not yet made its presence known. And when it did, it would not be gentle. Invitations began to arrive. Formal dinners. Social gatherings. Expectations wrapped in politeness. Clara held one such invitation in her hands, a familiar tension rising in her chest. The outside world was waiting. Watching. And it had already begun to decide who she was. That night, as she stood by the window, the letter still unopened on the table behind her, a quiet unease settled into her bones. For the first time since her wedding, the safety she had begun to trust felt fragile. And somewhere deep inside her, old instincts stirred, whispering the same lesson she had spent her life learning. Be quiet. Be careful. Endure. Clara closed her eyes. But this time, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to listen. The first invitation arrived on a cold morning, carried on thick ivory paper sealed with a crest Clara did not recognize, but understood nonetheless. It was not a request. It was an expectation. A formal dinner. A gathering of families whose names carried weight in every room they entered. People who did not simply observe society, they defined it. Clara held the card longer than necessary, her fingers resting lightly along its edge. She had known this moment would come. What she had not anticipated was the way her chest tightened at the thought of it. You don't have to attend, he said. She hadn't heard him enter. Clara turned slightly, finding him standing near the doorway, his expression calm, observant, as it always was when he was studying her without making it feel like scrutiny. I should, she replied automatically. The words came too quickly. Too easily. He did not argue. He rarely did. Instead he asked, "Do you want to?" The question unsettled her. What? It was still a foreign concept when applied to her own life. "I don't know," she admitted. He nodded, as though uncertainty was not something to be corrected. "Then we decide together," he said. The evening of the dinner arrived with quiet inevitability. The townhouse was grand in a way that felt deliberate, every detail designed to impress, to establish hierarchy without a single word being spoken. Polished floors reflected chandelier light. Conversations filled the air in soft, controlled tones, each one layered with implication. Clara felt it the moment she stepped inside. Some direct, some disguised, all assessing. She had been trained for this. She knew how to stand, how to smile, how to speak just enough and no more. And at first she did exactly that. But something had changed. Not enough to free her completely, but enough to make the act feel wrong. The conversations were polite. Too polite. "You must find your new position quite an adjustment. How fortunate you are." He has always been decisive. Each comment carried an undercurrent she could not ignore. They were not speaking to her. They were speaking around her, defining her, reducing her. Clara responded carefully, her voice steady, her posture composed. But inside, something shifted. Doubt, quiet and persistent, began to take root. Was this temporary? Was everything she had begun to trust only a phase, one that would fade the moment expectation demanded it? As though sensing the change, he moved closer, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive. Grounding. The contact steadied her more than she expected. She exhaled slowly. But society does not confine itself to one evening. It lingers. It spreads. It repeats. In the weeks that followed, invitations continued. Musical evenings. Luncheons. Gatherings where smiles were measured and words carefully chosen. And always, the whispers. "She is respectable, of course, but hardly his equal. One imagines the arrangement will change. A man like him does not remain patient forever." Clara never heard these statements directly. But she heard enough. Enough to understand. Enough to remember. Old lessons returned easily. Kindness fades. Endurance lasts. Do not expect permanence. She did not notice the change in herself at first. It was subtle. Gradual. She spoke less at meals. Deferred more often. Apologized again, for small things, for nothing at all. In quiet moments, her body stiffened, not from fear but from anticipation of its return. The progress she had made did not disappear. But it faltered. And he noticed. He always noticed. It was late evening when the tension finally broke. Clara had withdrawn from his touch with a soft excuse. Fatigue, she had said. It was believable. It was safe. But as she turned to leave, his hand closed gently around her wrist. Not forceful, but firm enough to stop her. "Clara," he said quietly. She stilled. "Look at me." She hesitated. Then did. "What has changed?" he asked. "I'm all right," she said. The answer came too quickly. Too smoothly. "You were," he said. "You aren't now." Silence stretched. She could feel it building inside her, the pressure of everything she had not said. And then, it broke. "They expect you to tire of me," she said, her voice unsteady. The words came faster after that. "The things they say, the way they look at me, like I am temporary, like I am a placeholder until something better appears." Her hands trembled. "I don't want to presume," she whispered. "I don't want to disappoint you." He released her wrist. But only to step closer. "You disappoint me," he said. Her breath caught. "Only when you disappear." She stared at him. "You were not brought into my life to be endured," he continued. "And I will not allow this world to train you back into silence." Her voice shook. "They are certain you will change." He moved closer still until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low, steady, unyielding. "I did not marry you out of obligation, or convenience, or pity." Her heart pounded. "I chose you," he said. The words settled differently this time. Not as reassurance, as truth. "I love you." There was no performance in it. No drama. Just certainty. Clara shook her head faintly. "They won't believe that." "Then they will learn," he replied. Pause. "But first you must." The letter from her aunt arrived days later. The paper was familiar, the handwriting precise, controlled. Clara knew what it would contain before she opened it. Approval, disapproval, expectation, all carefully balanced within polite language. She wishes to visit, Clara said quietly, lowering the letter. He looked up immediately. Do you want her here? The question struck her harder than it should have. What? Again. I think, she hesitated, then steadied herself. I think I need to speak to her. The vicarage felt smaller than she remembered. The ceilings lower, the walls closer. Or perhaps she had changed. Her aunt greeted her with the same composed expression, her gaze sharp, assessing. You seem well, Margaret said. Marriage suits you. Clara remained standing. The lessons you taught me, she said carefully, were clear. Margaret straightened slightly. A wife must endure, she replied. That is reality. Clara shook her head. No, she said. The word felt unfamiliar. But right. That was your reality. Silence filled the room. I was taught to disappear, Clara continued. To believe silence was virtue. That fear was normal. Margaret's expression hardened. You are ungrateful, she said sharply. You forget what men are capable of. I know exactly what they are capable of, Clara replied. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. And I choose something different. For the first time in her life, she did not wait for permission. She turned and left. The night of the grand ball arrived like a final test. Every prominent name was in attendance. Every expectation sharpened. Clara stood at the top of the staircase beside her husband, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her gown was deep blue, elegant, unmistakable. For a moment she hesitated. Then, they descended together. The room shifted. Not loudly, but noticeably. Conversations slowed. Eyes turned. Whispers died before they could form. He did not leave her side. Not once. He danced with her first. And again later. When others addressed him while ignoring her, he corrected it. Effortlessly. Naturally. As though it required no effort at all. And then, at the height of the evening, he raised his glass. The room quieted. I would like to offer a toast, he said. His voice carried easily, without force. To partnership. A ripple moved through the crowd. To respect, he continued. To marriage, not as endurance but as choice. He turned to her. My wife, he said, is not fortunate because she married well. Pause. I am fortunate because she chose me. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Clara felt it then. Not just in the room, but inside herself. Something shifting, settling, becoming. For the first time, she did not shrink beneath their gaze. She met it, held it, owned it. Later that night, the estate was quiet again. The world outside, distant, irrelevant. Clara stood by the window, the cool air brushing against her skin. He approached quietly, stopping beside her. You spoke, she said softly. He smiled faintly. You always could. She turned to him. I was just never allowed. There was no sadness in the words. Only clarity. She rested her hand over his. Then slowly, she guided it lower. A quiet gesture. A future. Something new. I am not afraid anymore, she said. He looked at her. Not with surprise, but with understanding. And if fear returns, he asked. She held his gaze. Then I will speak. Pause. Not endure. Outside, winter settled over the estate, covering the grounds in quiet white. Inside, for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore was not surviving. She was living, and she had chosen it.